So I want to welcome everyone. We have over 100 people on this recording to tonight's SEMCOG webinar, a discussion with United States Senator Gary Peters on the American Rescue Plan Act and its impact on local governments. My name is Amy O'Leary. I'm the Executive Director of SEMCOG, and we know that many of you have been anticipating the signing of this stimulus bill and eagerly awaiting more details on how it's implemented. So we're excited that Senator Peters will highlight the key aspects of this plan. After that, Senator Peters will take some questions, so feel free to send in your questions using the Zoom question and answer. We may not have time for everyone's questions tonight, but we will be following up with all of you, likely via regional update. So keep those questions coming. They help us develop real useful content here at SEMCOG going forward. I want to thank Senator Peters for being here to talk to the officials from local governments in Southeast Michigan. Having served in the past at the state and local level, Senator Peters understands the critical role of local governments and education in our people's lives in Southeast Michigan. And that was made very clear during this pandemic with all the work of our first responders and local governments. Senator Peters knows that. We appreciate that he's been a consistent and vocal supporter of funding for local governments as part of the federal relief packages aimed at COVID-19. And on behalf of local governments, I want to thank Senator Peters for all his efforts on this important piece of legislation. One thing we wanted to add of note was that the senator was recently named the #1 most effective senator by a nonpartisan Center for Effective Lawmaking, for having more standalone bills signed into law than any other senator in the past 2 years. So our goal today is to focus on the elements of this plan that impact local governments and the ability to serve our residents in Southeast Michigan. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Amy. Amy, I appreciate that. And I know we just apologize, a little technical issues to make sure I got on here. I could see you, you couldn't see me. So I'm glad we're able to put it together. And it's great to be and have an opportunity to speak with everybody on the call today. As Amy mentioned, I fully appreciate the difficult job that each and every one of you has. And you've performed it brilliantly through a very tough time. And we can start to see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel where we got to go, but we still got a lot more work to do. But I still remember very fondly my work as a member of the Rochester Hills City Council, and understand the importance of local government and how truly the rubber meets the road when it comes to our local governments, when it comes to serving your communities. So thank you for doing that. I think I'll paint kind of a broad brush picture here, and then because I really want to get to your questions, happy to answer those. Those that are I can answer. We've got staff on with me, and we're going to get back to everybody to make sure that you have the opportunity to get an answer to your questions as we move forward. This rescue plan has been absolutely critical to get us through the remaining months of this pandemic. Simultaneous public health and economic crisis. The good news is on the public health aspect, with the vaccine that continues to be distributed and getting into more and more arms, which will accelerate our ability at the other end. I was particularly involved in that aspect of the rescue plan because it dealt also with production of vaccines. And what is critically important right now is to actually get those vaccines in arms. I serve as the chair of Senate Homeland Security Committee. We oversee the Department of Homeland Security, and that includes FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks charged with the federal response. There is $50 billion in this bill to leverage state and local efforts, including your local efforts, to make sure you set up sites that allow the vaccine to be distributed to your community. FEMA is also setting up their own sites to do mass vaccinations. I'm sure all of you have seen the news about Ford Field will be one of those mass vaccination sites, able to do 6,000 people a day, and will be open for roughly for 8 weeks. So that's a lot of folks. But we also know that folks shouldn't just have to go to Ford Field. They should be getting it in their local communities, whether it's through local pharmacies, local county health providers, and other providers that can get it in. We're at the point now where there will be more vaccine available than there is capacity to get it into arms, which is why it's important that we lean in to set up these facilities and continue to move that forward in terms of the distribution. Just to give you some example of how that vaccine production is up, I was in just outside of Kalamazoo in Portage, Michigan, the site of the Pfizer manufacturing facility making their vaccine. A point of pride for us as Michiganders. It's made here in Michigan. When I was there roughly 3 weeks ago, they were producing 5 million doses a week out of there, which is amazing. But now they're producing 10 million doses a week. And they're going to continue to ramp up as they bring more production lines in place. So that ultimately is how we get through this, and certainly encouraging your residents to take the first vaccine that's available to them. That'll help us get to the other end. What has always been, though, a central point for me is that as we're looking at making sure there's income assistance for folks who are suffering or who have been impacted by unemployment for no fault of their own, stimulus payments, which are necessary to get the economy going, are critical. Making sure we're protecting our small businesses so that they can survive, which has been all part of previous packages. We knew we had to do more for local governments, from county governments and states, as well as our local governments. And that's why there's substantial resources in this package, roughly $350 billion to be spread out across the country. To counties, to local cities as well. And that will move fairly quickly. In fact, the target is to do it within 30, actually was it 30 days, or excuse me, 60 days, 60 days of enactment. That money will start heading out to states and local governments. If you're smaller, if you're not a county, it will go through the state, but they also need to disperse within 30 days. So this money is coming out. I'm sure you have specific questions, so I'm going to wrap it up there. So I just don't talk here in my opening, and I'd love to hear from you. Answered the questions that I can now. Those we can't, we will definitely get back to you with a more in-depth answer. So that, Amy, maybe we can open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much. We have been talking to local governments the last few days about this, and we do have a couple of questions that they've already been asking, but go ahead and put some more in the chat if you're interested. So you talked about when we're likely to receive the funds. Is it true that the funds will be distributed in 2 different payments? Is that how it will work?
It is. It's 2 tranches. So as I mentioned, within 60 days of enactment, they'll be dispersed, with 50% coming in that first amount. And then the idea is if you're a county or a large metropolitan area, you get the money directly to. If you're other communities, it goes through the state. But there's a timeline on that too, so it's timely. It has to be distributed within 30 days out after that. The remaining 50% goes out perhaps up to a year, 12 months. Where it'll be delivered actually no earlier than that 12-month period. So you got to be thinking of getting money probably within 90 days roughly, and then the next part about a year right now. But you can obviously use those funds as soon as you receive them.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about what the funds can be used for. Unlike the CARES Act, this allows communities to use the funds to replace lost revenues. What kinds of lost revenues and how are they determined?
Well, you look at the lost revenues based on where you were in your tax collections before the pandemic, and then where you are. So as you've been impacted, certainly that would be the lost revenues that could be used. But there's also they can be used for other parts of your community as well. So anything related to COVID emergency. So the economic effects. Including aid households. You can provide resources to households who may have been impacted in the community, small businesses, nonprofits. There's considerably more flexibility with this money than what you saw from previous packages. In fact, they can even be used to provide premium payment to essential workers as well who've been out there on the front lines. There's a cap on it. I think it's roughly $13 an hour. There's a cap on how much can be paid. And a total amount as well, roughly $25,000 in premium pay. But certainly those folks who have been out there exposing themselves, putting their families in harm's way to provide essential services can be reimbursed for that. And as well as other investments in public infrastructure. So the whole idea behind this was to make sure that resources were available first, and also to provide greater flexibility to the folks who know best what is necessary in the community. That's everybody on the call here today, for folks who know where that money is needed to help folks get to the other side of the pandemic.
All right, thank you. Um, Speaking of public infrastructure, you're right, that is quite a need and shown even more so with COVID pandemic. Maybe talk a little bit about what types of public infrastructure it can be used for.
Well, it's you can use it to make investments in water. You can do it in sewers and even broadband. So it quite a bit of flexibility there, the needs that all of our communities have. The one area that I've been particularly focused on is broadband. Have high-speed broadband internet to the community, so you can fill in any gaps that may exist in broadband infrastructure. Certainly, it's an issue for SEMCOG communities, but it's going to be a major issue for northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula to make sure that they have connections. But certainly, the sewer and water needs are extensive throughout the SEMCOG region, and this will provide resources to address that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. When it comes to broadband, we've been talking a lot to local governments about that. And one of the issues that has been raised is a lot of times local governments aren't qualified to be able to receive the funding for broadband assistance. And so this is exciting that, they can step in and help on broadband with this money.
Yeah, and this money, and if I may add, we're looking to provide additional resources for broadband as well. One piece of legislation that I wrote and was put into effect will create better mapping for other federal resources outside of this money. Is that right now a lot of that money is how it's determined and allocated to various localities is based on maps and who has coverage and who doesn't. But we have found that those maps are inadequate and are inaccurate. And now have opportunities to be able to correct those maps. And local communities can be engaged to make sure to say, hey, this map is not correct. We don't have this. We would qualify for federal funds outside of this one. In addition to this, make it easier for you to qualify for other federal funds so that everybody gets connected. I'm with all of you on this. I think we all agree that basically high-speed broadband is the equivalent of electricity, and we make sure everybody has access to electricity. The same has to occur with broadband. So we continue to try to plug those gaps.
Oh, that's really good to hear. We have the same issues we've done some mapping ourselves and we're getting the same feedback. So we definitely need to work on that. Thank you. So a couple of questions that have come in on the chat is, when do you expect the Treasury Department to issue regulations? And I'm sorry, let me just finish with, and do you expect those regulations to be strict in terms of restricting the use of funds?
Well, first off, we're hoping that they do it as quickly as possible, because the whole idea is to get this out. That's why we had to get the money out. It has to be out within 60 days. And then we want the states to turn around quickly as well, because we know the need is now, and the need actually the need was yesterday. So that's why it's important to get the money to you as quickly as possible to go forward. So we'll continue to push the Department of Treasury to do that. They have indicated that they're working as quickly as possible. So, but I don't have an actual timeline for that. But clearly, if the money's coming, you have to know. As far as the guidelines, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have flexibility in what you can use it for. But clearly, with that flexibility, there are some guardrails there, and we have to make sure the guardrails are put in place that the money is being used for what it's intended to do, which is to help primarily for communities to get through the COVID crisis, reimburse revenues lost, help those who are suffering as a result of it, but in the process also dealing with longer term issues that are really were brought to bear and brought to light through the COVID crisis. I'll just go back to broadband again. When we know our students are going online, and a third of the students in our state do not have the connectivity to go online, when we know the residents of your community can use telehealth and stay in the safety of their home and have access to healthcare, and we know small businesses are successful because they can get on high-speed internet to sell their products, that's related to COVID and a crisis, and we want to protect that from the future too. So those guidelines are also fairly broad, but still come back to the impacts or what we saw were gaps as a result of being through the pandemic.
Great. Speaking of use of the funds, a question from Danny Walsh is, can it be used towards capital projects that we had to put off due to lost revenues?
We'll have to get back. I don't have the answer to that specifically. That may be part of the rulemaking. It may depend on what the project is, I suspect. So, but we can get back with an answer as to what we expect in that area.
Okay. Lots of questions about how the funds can be used. I'm sure people are pretty excited and have a lot of questions, so it's okay if you don't know all these answers right now. People are asking about using the funds for OPEB and pensions, using the funds for parks and walking trails. Anything on that?
Again, those kinds of specifics, we'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I see I have Josh from my staff who just put up.
I see that, Josh. I thought it was a question. He's answering.
But that goes back to the broadband that I mentioned. So you can do the critical broadband is available. So that's a capital project, clearly. As to the extent of what other capital projects, we'll have to find out. But clearly broadband is one of those capital projects, as I've already talked about.
Right. A question was, do you know how that set aside of $10 billion, how that money will be accessed?
Again, that's in the weeds. I'm not sure specifically what the aspect will be for that.
Okay.
And a lot of that will have to be worked out, I'm sure.
And the funds need to be spent by 2024. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is a time limit on them too. So the idea is to get it out and put it. I mean, a big part of why we're helping the communities and the rationale behind it is about get the economy up and running quickly. So it's making sure you're getting the money out. You have needs that have been pent up and built up, but the money needs to be spent now. We would assume that once the economy is up and running, tax revenues will start recovering and the revenues will be coming in. The economy will start going as well.
We have been hearing about a major infrastructure bill coming, which would probably also include broadband in that. Do you think a local government should wait for that package prior to investing in broadband infrastructure, or should we invest in getting ready for that future funding? Do you want to talk a little bit about the infrastructure work that you all are doing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Although I guess in my off the cuff answer is that I'm going to use the old expression: a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. So if we've passed this bill, I would take a look at your list of projects that you think are critical for the community, and act on that now. We are working on an infrastructure bill, which will, as you mentioned, broadband will be part of it, but it'll be roads and bridges. You're also going to be talking about locks. The Soo locks will hopefully be included. A part of that. We've been able to get additional funding for that, but more. So those are all of those projects as well. So we're hoping to get bipartisan agreement on that. We have to have bipartisan support unless we use a reconciliation process again, which I'm sure many of your folks on here know it's an arcane process used to get around a filibuster rule that exists in the Senate. But the hope is to have bipartisan support to come forward. I think everybody, to be honest, everybody agrees we need to invest in infrastructure. Where the agreement breaks down is that how do we pay for it? And to what extent do we borrow? What is going to be the percentage to be paid for? I think we all agree there has to be some pay-fors for the infrastructure project. But that doesn't mean 100%. We can still borrow. Certainly a very strong argument can be made is that we may not see the kinds of interest rates we have right now as low as they are. And if you're going to borrow money, this is a pretty good time to be borrowing money on the long-term payment schedule. But nevertheless, there still needs to be pay for. So that will likely be a contentious debate.
Right. One of the things that we've seen when looking at the allocations was we didn't see villages in there. And I don't know if that's unique to Michigan more so than other parts of the country, but that might be something that we need some follow-up on, that how the money is granted to townships, is that tied to the villages in which are surrounded by the townships? I know that our staff has been trying to dig into that, and we have a few townships on the line that encompass some villages, so.
Yeah, and I think that has been brought up. If you're looking at some non-entitlement communities will be getting
Right.
resources. So there is a formula. The formula I think is still being worked out. A lot of it is per capita as to how some of this works. I know there were some charts that were sent around that some folks on the call have probably seen. But I'd be cautious using those because we have not seen firm numbers come out of Treasury yet as to how that is going to be allocated. But per capita is probably the main part of that formula, but the numbers will clearly vary for communities based on a number of criteria.
Okay.